Hello, and welcome to From Our Perspective to Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia Glassman.
And I'm Katie Truax. And we have with us my hubby, Dr. Rob Truax, today.
Yay.
We've mentioned him at the end of our podcast because when we give you guys like where you can find us to follow us or follow up with us, we always say that Rob and I practice together at robandkatietruax.com. And my husband, Rob, he is a chiropractor of, how long have you been doing it, baby? 28 years?
Yeah, 28 years.
You oldster. And then maybe not a lot, but I would say a good chunk of chiropractic professionals choose to also go down kind of a secondary path of education into the world of functional wellness or holistic wellness, because the common denominator that ties the two together, the philosophies, are so similar, and the belief in the body's ability to heal if given the right circumstances kind of tie the two together, right, Rob? And
That's
so
correct.
you have done extensive continuing education and apprenticeships for as long as I've known you, which has been 20 years. Good God.
Yeah.
How long have you been training in the field of functional wellness specifically?
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that. And I think it is about 20 years that I've been doing functional wellness. Yeah.
And just to kind of give our listeners a little bit of perspective, we were chatting a bit before we popped on, before we started recording, the world of holistic healthcare is so varied and diverse, right? There's everything from naturopaths, DOs, chiropractors, indies, gosh, I don't know. There's energy work there. The sky is the limit under that umbrella, right? And so there's so much variation with how people practice. And, Claudia and I think are similar in the belief that there's so much goodness out there, right? And like that there's so many different things that can be helpful and beneficial. And she and I both partake in lots of things to kind of maintain our wellness from a holistic perspective. So what Dr. Rob's going to share today is kind of like his perspective on things, which is, I think, beautiful and wonderful. But, obviously, like, other people have different perspectives, and nothing is going to be the end all be all or, completely comprehensive or conclusive, right?
That's correct.
Man of many words.
Oh, yes.
So we're gonna have to listen you up talking to us today. I probably get the words relationship.
Well, are you ready to get into it?
Yeah, what are we talking about today, Claudia?
We're talking about Rob. All about Rob.
Well, specifically, we're going to be talking about gut health and mood.
Yes.
Thank you.
That was. He's like, I will get you people on track. That is what we said we were going to talk about.
I got to rein you guys in. That was the brief. Gut health and mood.
That's what you're ready for.
I know. He's like, stop babbling. Right. And I was just going to tell our listeners, you guys can feel free to psychoanalyze the dynamics in our marriage as we go through this podcast. Go ahead, Claudia.
So, Rob, can you talk briefly about what the functional wellness you do looks like? Because that's what Katie was kind of talking about. It can look very different depending on the practitioner, and there's a wide range of people that use the term holistic or functional medicine. So what does it look like in your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are so many different practitioners out there. Typically my approach is basically three main things. So one, I like to do an in-person consultation and just get all their presenting concerns, how long they've had them, if they've attempted to do anything to resolve whatever they're presenting with, right? And if that's worked or not. And then I also like to do a computerized online assessment. That online assessment is actually broken down into groups, and each group relates to a different organ, gland, or system of the body. So it can really give me a nice overview from their perspective, right, as to what's going on. And then I also do an in-person assessment, which is just a non-invasive way for me to essentially test the different organs and glands of the body to see if they're strong or weak. And if they're weak, what might be causing that weakness. So sometimes that could be a food sensitivity, it could be an immune challenge, so like a virus, bacteria, fungus, parasite, yeast, something like that, a toxin, a heavy metal, etc., right? Or perhaps they just need some type of nutritional support for that organ or gland. So I do a form of, muscle testing called NRT, or nutrition response testing, which is under the umbrella of like applied kinesiology. There's other techniques like CRA, which is contact reflex analysis, under that umbrella as well. And there's many others because, doctors will get into practice and then they'll change a few things and then they'll, decide to call it their own technique. And but all of it's under really the broad umbrella of applied kinesiology, or what we loosely call muscle testing, even though it's not muscle testing in the traditional sense. We're not looking for strength of the muscle. We're looking more of a reflex. Either the muscle engages or it doesn't. And that's really the essence of, muscle testing from a functional wellness perspective.
Right, because that then muscle gives you, the way it responds gives you information about what's going on with a particular organ, gland, issue, or weakness, or right, that's going on in the body. So we're going to talk about mood and gut health, but
Correct.
just as like a brief overview, what are some of the other things you work with? Because I know that is not, you're not just a mood gut health person. You do a lot of different things. So for those that don't know what they would see someone like you for, what would that look like? Who comes to see you?
Oh, well, it varies, from individual to individual, but I mean, anything from, well, mood disorders, right? Sometimes it could be anxiety, depression, difficulty sleeping. It could be fatigue, or low energy. It could be brain fog, difficulty concentrating, weight-related issues, hormonal-related issues, irregular menstrual cycle, things like that. Thyroid is a big one, so hypothyroidism, or Hashimoto's, autoimmune stuff. So it kind of just spans the gamut. Most of the time, people that come to me have already gone the medical route for whatever they have, but are not seeing results. Maybe they're on medication or something like that. Let's just take Hashimoto's as a good example, right? So they've got Hashimoto's, and they go to the endocrinologist. They're put on, thyroid medication, but they don't feel any different. They still have fatigue. They're still maybe losing their hair. They still have brain fog, etc. And so they seek alternatives, right? Because from the medical perspective, it's like, all right, well, you're good, like here's your medication and you go on your way and you'll be on this the rest of your life. And that's pretty much all they do. But yet, like I said, they want to feel better. They want to notice some physical changes to their body. So they'll seek out functional wellness or other alternative forms of care. So that's how a lot of people end up, their way into my office.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I want to add to something that you said, because I don't want for us to know it and take it for granted, whereas maybe our listeners don't. Just to give a quick definition, right? If we think about, so yes, there's so many different types of holistic medicine. Functional medicine, right? Or we use the term sometimes functional wellness because we, as natural health providers, don't use drug treatments. We don't use medication per se. So functional wellness, right? What we're looking at with all those types of assessments that you'd mentioned, right? The conversation, the systems survey, and then the NRT exam. You're aiming to assess the level of functionality of each organ, body system, gland, or sometimes levels of hormones or neurotransmitters, right? So the 5 things that kind of make the body run, right? how are they functioning? And so, for example, that system survey, it's a questionnaire that asks about 200 different symptoms, right? But we don't treat symptoms. We use the symptoms to point us back to different organs or glands that are in charge of regulating symptoms, right? So for example, things like cold extremities, right, tells you information about the organs and glands involved in circulation, perhaps, and so forth and so on, right? And that's just one example. But, and then again, the NRT exam is looking at, all right, when you get a test, the muscle testing shows that something is weak. It's not that the muscle is weak or that the organ is weak, but it's not functioning at its optimal level.
Right.
Correct. Yeah, and that's a great point. You know, a functional, just as the name implies, we're looking for functionality. We're not looking for pathology, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of times, let's just give an example. Like, so maybe the liver is showing up from a functional standpoint, right? Maybe it's showing up as their number one priority on the system survey. Maybe it's showing up on their functional wellness exam. But say if we were to do blood work, right, all of their liver enzymes and everything could be totally fine because again, we're looking at two different things. You know, typically there's some type of pathology going on for liver enzymes to be abnormal, whereas we're looking, you know, at something completely different, which is functionality. So we can have totally normal blood work but still need support from a functional standpoint, especially, well, really with any organ or gland, but especially with the liver, because it's involved in well over 500 metabolic functions. So it has a lot of work to do, not just from a detox standpoint, but from a digestive standpoint, metabolizing and activating hormones for the body, et cetera. So, so oftentimes, you know, things can show up from a functional standpoint where they wouldn't show up otherwise with
Okay.
blood work or something like that.
Right. Good. And so then segueing right into gut health, right? We gut health and the relationship between that and mood specifically, right? It's our topic today because we're therapists,
Right.
two therapist moms, and a mic with a mic.
And a dad. And dad.
A dad too. So the gut, right? Robert, what are some of the functions of the gut? Because people might not know that the gut has different functions, right? What is the functionality when the gut's working at its optimal level? What does it do?
Well, and that, yeah, most people think of their gut as just being a system that digests food, and that's it, right? So they think, all right, I'm gonna eat this meal, and then maybe I have some digestive distress or I don't, you know, but either way, that's the only function, right? It's just simply to break down the food, and which is a large part of what the digestive system does, but you know, they might not realize that our mood is strongly influenced by our gut health, as well as our immune system is also strongly influenced by our gut health. So when we look at the makeup of the intestinal tract, the what most a lot of people might not realize that your brain and your gut are actually developed from the same tissue during fetal development. So, and also there are over 100 million neurons in your intestinal tract, neurons being brain cells. So that's why oftentimes the gut is referred to as the second brain for a couple reasons, right? One, the presence of brain cells in the gut. Um, there is a direct connection between your brain and your gut via the vagus nerve, which is, you know, a cranial nerve. So you know, there's a neurological connection there, but there's also you know, even a deeper connection as far as developmentally the same tissue, and then also the presence of brain cells and the bulk of our neurotransmitters are actually formed in the gut. So typically when we talk about neurotransmitters, we think, oh, brain, right? Or if we think about someone having a mood disorder, right? Like anxiety or depression, we think, oh, there must be something going on with the brain or the neurotransmitters of the brain. But yet, research is showing that a large part of those neurotransmitters are actually found in the gut. And especially when we look at serotonin, you know, research is saying anywhere from 90 to 95% of the body's serotonin is actually found in the gut, right? Which is your primary, mood determining neurotransmitter. That's what, the majority of antidepressants work on is, serotonin. So it's just um, a lot more than just your breaking down food. It's going to influence your mood. It's going to influence your immune system. And really, not to dive too deep into it, it can really influence really other aspects of your body because so it can influence your hormonal or endocrine system. It can influence your body's ability to detoxify properly. It can influence your ability to respond to stressors, allergies, whether that's food or environmental sensitivities can be influenced by your gut health. So really, the gut is the major player when we just look at overall health and well-being, and we can dive into like why if we have time, but um because like I said, we could sit here and talk for really hours on the influence of the gut on just overall health and well-being.
Yeah. So, what are some of the things that contribute to poor gut health for those that don't know? And like everyday things, right? Things that habits people have, things people do. What are you seeing seems to be the most impactful to people's gut health?
Well,
And can you also say too, as you answer that, can you add in like, I mean, where does the gut start and end, right? I mean, is it the
Yeah,
entire?
what is the gut?
Yeah,
Right.
like the entire digestive system? Is it just the intestines? Like what is this gut thing?
It's a good
all
question.
right. Well, if you technically, right, now if and again, it depends on what function of the gut we're talking about, right? So from a digestive standpoint, right, the gut starts with the mouth, right? That's where where you're gonna have it begin with the breakdown of food and saliva starting to break that down and so on, right, into the upper gastrointestinal tract, right, the stomach, and then into the small intestine, etc. Generally speaking, when we say gut, from my perspective, when I talk about gut health with patients, I'm looking usually at their small and large intestine, and I also like to include the liver and gallbladder in that because the liver and gallbladder are involved with the digestive process, right, with the breakdown of dietary fats, etc. So I do include just overall gut health as being liver, gallbladder, small and large intestine. Um, you can expand that even a little bit further if you wanted to and include the pancreas, right, with pancreatic enzymes and things like that. But generally speaking, that's what I consider the gut.
Okay. And so what are some of
Now,
the things you see people doing that are, not
Damaging.
helping their guts function at its
yeah,
optimal
I would
capabilities?
I would say the biggest thing is diet.
Yeah.
People just eat crap, eating crappy food, to put it bluntly. Um, whether that's non-organic food, right, where you have pesticides and herbicides and things like that on the food, to food additives, food dyes, um, inflammatory foods, right, consuming refined sugars, dairy, gluten, things like that, where even though we might not necessarily have an allergy or sensitivity to those foods, but they are inflammatory, right, in the gut. And most people feel better avoiding those foods
Mhm.
than consuming them. So diet is really the biggest contributor. And then I would say medications, right? If anybody's on medication that, disrupts your gut health. Obviously, environmental conditions like, toxins that we may come in contact with, pathogens, whether that's, mold or, other, environmental toxins. So, but the biggest one and the easiest to control would be your diet.
Yeah.
Just simply changing your diet, drinking, plenty of water, eating good, healthy, whole foods rather than drinking Coke and, eating, I don't
Things
know, Pop Tarts
packaged.
and yeah,
Yeah.
processed packaged foods, sodas and energy drinks and, just things like that are laden with sugar and artificial flavors, chemicals, stuff like that.
Yeah. So you brought up inflammation, and
Mhm.
this question may seem very simple to you, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's important. We hear it a lot of reduce inflammation, but why does inflammation matter? Like for people that are sitting there being like, and who cares if I'm inflamed? I'm still I'm digesting okay. Maybe I even feel okay, right? Um,
Mhm.
what does inflammation in the body do? I guess specifically in the gut that makes it problematic for people.
All right. Well, so if we're consuming inflammatory foods, right, on a regular basis, then what we're going to do is we're going to create low grade inflammation in the intestinal tract with the mucosal lining of the intestinal tract. Now, the problem with that is one, anytime we have inflammation, right, your body wants to try and reduce that inflammation. And the primary way that it does that is it releases a hormone known as cortisol from the adrenal glands, which gets converted to cortisone, which is your main anti-inflammatory hormone, right? So if we have chronic low-grade inflammation, then we're putting chronic stress on the adrenal glands to produce this hormone known as cortisol. And over time, that can create a number of issues. So one, right, cortisol is it's a fat storing hormone, so it can negatively influence that person's weight. Cortisol has an inhibitory effect on the thyroid, so it can inhibit the conversion of T4 to T3, which is the active form of the thyroid hormone. It can also basically kind of weaken or stress out the adrenal glands so that we start getting lower levels of the other hormones that the adrenal glands produce, such as progesterone or estrogen or testosterone, right? So then it can start to have other influences on the body. And also your adrenal glands produce neurotransmitters as well. So, we're talking about gut and mood, but also your adrenal glands are involved with mood regulation as well, right? So if we have this chronic inflammation in the gut, that's putting chronic stress on other glands in the body, whether that's the thyroid, adrenals, etc. And then that it's kind of like a snowball effect, whereas that
Yeah.
can start to develop issues of mood or difficulty sleeping or fatigue or what have you. So, and then also whenever we have inflammation in the gut, that's going to affect the way our body absorbs and utilizes nutrients as well. And a lot of times that chronic inflammation can lead to leaky gut because the junctions of the in the intestinal tract, right, you have kind of like little finger like projections, right,
Mhm.
that run along the lining of the intestinal tract. And what can happen is we can start to get some separation of the junctions, which then allow particles to leak through the lining of the intestinal tract and get into the bloodstream where they don't belong. So, which commonly referred to as leaky gut syndrome, right? So then once we start getting these toxins into the bloodstream, then that's when we can start to develop, sensitivities because we're getting particles like food particles and things in our bloodstream that don't belong there, and the immune system recognizes that, so it creates a reaction to that substance, so we can start to develop a sensitivity or an allergy to certain foods, right? The more stress the more we get things into the bloodstream that don't belong there, then we're going to put stress on the liver, because the liver filters the blood. So the inflammation in itself, can have broad, like gut inflammation in itself can have really broad whole body implications, if
Right.
that
Because it
makes
affects
sense.
every system then.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yikes. So now that you scared everyone.
I know. I was like, gut, liver, adrenals, mood, brain.
Yeah. Because it's right. And that's the point, right? It is all interconnected. So while we're talking about gut health and mood, the
Right.
reality is it's not a clean package that is only in this box and doesn't impact anything else. We're trying to simplify it and stay on one topic so it's not so overwhelming, but obviously it's an interplay of your whole system. So one thing will always impact another and it never operates in isolation, which is, part of why it matters.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
also part of why I love kind of that functional wellness approach, right? Because when Rob works with a patient, he looks at the entire body, right? Every single time. It's never just like, oh, let me check your adrenals today. Oh, they're good. You're out the door, right? Like, it's like, let me look at everything. And you can catch things, right? Like, ooh, you know what? Look, that looks like, oh, your kidneys are a little stressed today. Like, let's give them a little bit of support, right? And all of a sudden, once we support one organ or gland, right, just like the domino effect of negative he just ran through, right? We can have the domino effect of positive too. Like, okay, we're going to support one organ that has an play with many, many others, and we can kind of stop a domino effect from happening, right? Because we're going to intervene there. So one of the things we can do to support gut health, right, is to eat clean, which is actually easier done, and I'm saying this intentionally, than people think, right? Like you say, oh, easier said than done, but it's not, right? It is a shift for most people, right? But it's not actually usually that hard, right? Now, the caveat is you have to be able to access clean food. I'm aware that not everybody does it has the ability to access clean food. There are improvements in that, things like companies that will ship, right? But there was a time when I remember, Rob, when we would travel, we would map our route based on proximity to a Whole Foods market because our family eats organic. And now, right, more and more mainstream stores are carrying organic foods, but there were times not too long ago when you could not get food that in certain areas of our country, much less other countries, right, that were not chemical free, right? Just as an example. Or things, I mean, even now when we travel, right, it's you kind of have to pick your battles, choose from some the least harmful substances, right? What's going to be the least harmful thing I can pick up on I-95 to feed my body, right? But generally speaking, right, you said, okay, if you're eating at home and if you're wanting to gear up for positive gut health, we want people to be eating organic. We want them to be avoiding grains. We want them to be avoiding dairy.
Yeah.
I do not think that's easier said than done than said,
Well,
whatever you said. I think for people that are not eating this way, that is a big shift.
It is. But don't you
it is
think
a big shift, but
it's okay? Like, don't you think once you wrap your mind around it, you're like, this is okay. I can do this.
Because it becomes your normal, right? It becomes easier. I also I knocked on packaged foods. There are companies out there making organic packaged foods with whole ingredients and not a ton of other stuff. So the world is changing. So those convenience items, that might be hard to live without, you can probably find alternatives. But I do think it's hard if you're not used to this way of consuming food.
It is, and you can pick, one thing, all right, well, instead of drinking, and it can be something gradual, right? Well, instead of drinking 3 Cokes a day, I'm only going to drink 1, and then I'll drink water the rest of the day or something like that. Or okay, he said no dairy, so I'll stop doing, the ice cream, or I'll buy, ice cream that's made with almond milk or cashew milk or coconut milk or something like that, right? A non-dairy alternative. So that way it doesn't feel like you're being, depriving yourself.
That's
So there's lots of things that you can, all right, I'm going to trade this out, but add this in, right? So you're not creating a void.
Right.
Um, well, instead of eating this bread, I'll get this healthier, you know, choice over here. So oftentimes it can be a gradual process. I mean, if you're w- willing to be gung ho and just make a shift overnight, that's great. But it can be a gradual process, because the what will happen is, as they start to make those changes, they'll notice that they feel better. And then as they start to feel better, that motivates them, right, to continue. I mean, I have people all the time that tell me, like, oh yeah, since I cut out the dairy and gluten, I really think that's made a big
Mhm.
difference, you know? And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, you think so? So, just that those couple little changes can make a profound difference. I'm not saying that you can't ever have it, right? But if, kind of the 80-20 rule, right? If 80% of the time we're eating clean and eating well, then that 20% of the time, like if you're celebrating a birthday or an anniversary or something like that, and you're going to go out to dinner or go out with friends, and you just want to, like, well, I'm just going to eat whatever I want that night. That's fine. You can do that. Just the thing is to get back on track the next day, and just
Mhm.
don't let it continue. So it's not like you have to be rigid.
Right.
Depending on what your health condition is, there might be times, where you have to be rigid for a certain period of time. But generally speaking, right, we can kind of do that, like I said, 80-20-90-10 rule, where, all right, majority of the time I'm going to eat clean, and then, I have these circumstances or instances, celebrations, where I'll let loose a little bit. But it's something that is the easiest thing for someone to do, that can make a dramatic difference in their mood, right?
Mhm.
Because it'll take stress off the gut, right? We're talking about gut and mood. So it'll take stress off the gut, it'll reduce inflammation in the gut, which then has a positive influence on our neurotransmitters, right? Because like serotonin is released when we consume food, but we want that to be healthy food that we're consuming into our gut, because that releases those feel good neurotransmitters. So, you know, food is the quick. I always tell people the quickest way to change your body chemistry is through food. And
Mhm.
really, the quickest way to change your mood is through food. I mean, think about, sometimes you eat food, and like within like 20-30 minutes, if you eat crappy food, you're like, man, why did I eat that? Like, I feel horrible,
I'm
right?
guilty of that. Yeah.
And then there's other times, when you're eating well, like you feel good, like mentally and physically. So it's like, it's the quickest way to influence your physical and mental well-being is just through diet alone.
Right. And I imagine, because you were talking about how inflammation, chronic inflammation, one of the things that happens is also you're not absorbing nutrients from the foods you do
Right.
eat. So if you, even if you're eating healthy sometimes, but you're eating unhealthy most of the time, the thing you eat that's healthy isn't giving you it's the maximum bang for its buck, because your body can't break it down and take all the nutrients. So then you become vitamin and mineral deficient, I
Right.
imagine,
Yeah,
as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
correct.
Which
Yep.
also impacts mood, right?
Which, yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Okay, so a couple of like pointers, right? If somebody wanted to move in this direction, we've mentioned them, but just to summarize, right? We have some substitutions out there, right? So if you live in proximity to a health food store, right, you're going to be able to find these on your shelves. You're going to be able to find gluten, or if you want to be really, really good, grain-free crackers, pastas, breads. It's out there. It really is out there. Look in your
mhm,
frozen food section. You can find organics now on most mainstream grocery shelves, both in canned and boxed items, as well as in the fresh fruit and vegetable area, as well as in the meats. Um, you can find
Well,
dairy substitutions, right? Like we love certain brands. A lot of the substitutions are made from nuts and have a very nice texture and taste to them. Things like, I mean, in our family, we use Kite Hill for things like sour cream and cream cheese that's made from almonds. We drink a milk that is made from peas. We've been quote unquote dairy free, and I'll come back to when I say that in a moment, for a long time. And I tell you, it has come a long way. We used to not be able to have any of this stuff. And then, so when I said quote unquote, one of the things that our family has done, and this is kind of a newer trend in the natural health community, is thinking back to maybe it's okay to have a little bit of raw organic cheese, right? Or some people even do raw organic milk. It's kind of a field divided. Some people are still like dairy free is the way to go. Other people say, oh no, there's so many health benefits to grass-fed raw organic dairy. Go ahead and consume it. Just be really careful that you're getting really good quality. Do you have a thought about that, Rob?
yes. And I agree that there is people divided on the raw dairy side. The thing, I think raw dairy can be beneficial, and it really becomes individual, because some people, it all depends on their level of health and well-being. So some people can tolerate raw dairy very easily, and then other people still won't be able to tolerate it, if depending on like their health situation. But generally speaking, I think raw dairy is beneficial. Raw milk, which, again, depending on where you live, you'll probably need to get from a farmer's market or a local farmer or something like that. It's not really sold commercially. Um, Raw cheese that is made from raw milk is, right. You can find that at pretty much your grocery stores and stuff like that. Which I wanted to mention, going back to the farmer's market. A farmer's market is a great place, right? So you won't necessarily find quote unquote organic, right? Because to have that seal on there, you have to pay the government, money, and it's quite a bit of money to have that. But if you can find a farmer that where it says naturally grown, then that's going to be your best bet there. And farmers markets are great because most of the time it's the actual farmer there, so you can be like, oh, I see naturally grown, so you don't use any chemicals or herbicide. Nope, it's everything is 100% natural, whatever. So you can talk with them right there, and oftentimes you can buy your produce or even meat, right, that is grass fed meat, even though they might not, like I said, have the government approved terminology, but still be a safe alternative for you, versus if you don't have like a Whole Foods near you or a grocery store where you could get grass-fed beef or organic produce or something like that. Because farmers markets, at least in general, and I would have really increased in popularity. They used to be few and far between, and only on the weekend. Now there's several days during the week where there's farmers markets. It's not just the weekend anymore, and they're just multiple locations. And so pretty much most cities and areas will have farmers market, and if not, even just buying directly from a farmer, or if you have a friend that has a big backyard that's growing produce or has chickens or something, a lot of times, they're willing to, like, oh yeah, I've got plenty of eggs. I'll be happy to, sell you a dozen a week or something like that. So there's options out there.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned minimizing sugar, right? So things like sodas, where it can really, you've got a lot of sugar in
Right.
one hit there, where if you're thirsty, right? Like maybe let's substitute that with water.
Yeah.
Or there's even some beautiful alternatives out right now. Again, going back to, we're living such a good time for this, right? Where there are drinks like Zevia is one of my favorites personally, right? Which is flavored with stevia, which is a plant-based sweetener. Not all our alternative sweeteners are created equal. Things like stevia and monk fruit, right, are both generally pretty accepted to be a good alternative. Rob, is that right? Where things like sucralose, saccharin, what are some of how
The
would you define?
erythritol or whatever they're adding to, so that's the one that I think when you buy monk fruit and stevia, just make sure it just says stevia extract or monk fruit, because they throw in
Other
added,
stuff?
like, they like cut it with other stuff, so it's not pure. But you can find brands that are just 100%.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, and again, it can be a preference. Some people, stevia does have a little bit of an aftertaste, which some people don't care for, but it from a health standpoint, it's fine, if it's pure, like Claudia was saying, pure stevia extract, because like like there's some company like Truvia, right, which does have stevia in it, but it also has some other things added to it, like Claudia was talking about. So you don't want to go with Truvia, but you can get pure stevia, and you can get that in a powder or a liquid. So the little packets, if you like to carry those with you, you can get that, or even the liquid, which is like a concentrated form. And there's a brand called Sweet Leaf, which has all different types of flavored stevias as well. So you could get like root beer flavored stevia, and you can just have, put that in your water, and it's like drinking like root beer, or cola or whatever. And
You've been
it's
holding out on me. I didn't know about this,
so, yeah, so there's, well, you buy the Zevia, which is basically the same thing, but I'm just saying, there's so many different options now. It's way more convenient now to eat healthier than it was, say, even 5 or 10 years ago, because there's
So
just so
I'm gonna,
many options.
and so for people just to for our listeners who are outside of metro areas, right, where you can easily access a Whole Foods Market, a good source online is Thrive Market. This is a place my
Mhm.
family who lives on the Jersey coast loves Thrive Market. They order so much good stuff through Thrive Market because they live in an area where it's like an hour to Whole Foods, man, and they've got this farmer's market. You can get some really good things at this one, but you can't get everything there, right? And you can go to this store and get these other good things here, but you can't get everything there, right? And so it's sometimes a matter of like, okay, well, I got to go 6 different places, right? And one of the things that can be a really nice resource for folks who live in areas like that, or in rural areas where you can't get really any of this stuff, is Thrive Market. And I'm sure, I don't know of them because I've maybe one of you two do, but I'm sure there's also, I think Thrive is mostly
Packaged foods.
packaged, right? Yes, but I'm sure there are also.
So you can do meat deliveries. There's a growing number of companies that do grass-fed, grass-finished, no antibiotic use meats.
Right.
I just found another one the other day. They pop up all the time. Now, they are more expensive.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to throw out for people is it can be expensive to eat organic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's not an option to go all in, or you just can't find everything organic, because that is a really real problem too, right? There's certain produce that you can find organic very easily, and then there's sometimes you can't. So you have 2 options. You can buy the organic frozen version of that thing. Example, we couldn't find strawberries the other day. It was really annoying. So you can buy frozen organic strawberries if you can't find the fresh ones, right? Or you can go to EWG, which is the Environmental Working Group, and they publish a list, I think it's every year, right, of their dirty dozen and their clean 15. And what they do is look at the amount of pesticides found in different produce, and it changes. But they will tell you which ones would make the most sense to invest in to go organic, and then those that maybe don't matter as much because they're not finding as many pesticides in that product. And that's a good resource too, if you're just like, I can't do everything organic.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to mention that as well if you didn't bring it up, because that is That is a great way to kind of prioritize, right? The clean 15 and the dirty dozen. Because yeah, it is expensive, granted. And then, um, as far as, if you can get grass-fed beef, you know, it's worth the extra cost of that compared to just commercial like beef, just because it's going to be so much more healthier for you. Whereas commercial beef, well, one, it's fed grains, right, which is not natural to a cow's diet, so to fatten them up. So, and again, since the grains are not natural to a cow's diet, it creates inflammation in the cow. Right. So you're going to have those hormones released in the meat. And then also they're pumped up with antibiotics and things like that, because typically on commercial feedlots, right, the animals are all in close proximity. And so they don't want them to get sick, because if one gets sick, they all get sick. So they're pumped up with, high doses of antibiotics. And so you're consuming antibiotics and hormones in that meat. Whereas if you get a grass-fed beef, um, you're not going to have the level of hormones or the antibiotic um,
Yeah.
use that you would on commercial beef. So it's worth it,
Yeah. You could do a little research too. I know people that this sounds so gross, but they buy a cow and they
Yeah,
split it between two families. So they
yeah,
find a farm that has farming practices that align with what they want, and you can buy a whole cow. It's a lot up front, but you split it with a couple of families, because again, it's the whole cow, and then you stock your freezer, because beef has gotten, I don't know about where you guys live, beef is crazy expensive here
yeah,
lately. And but I know a lot of people that buy these whole cows and just store it in their freezer and then have, lots of cow meat
yeah.
ready to
There's
go.
absolutely cow share,
Yeah.
it's totally a thing. And so where you might be paying, 9.99 a pound, for ground beef, if you buy your cow or share it, you could get it for something like 6.99, so it ends up being a lot more affordable. You just have to have the room, right? The freezer space in order to do that.
Yeah.
You
And
know, but
honestly, too, in some of these more rural areas, right? Like, I think about areas we travel to, and I think about areas, um, who don't have access to these stores. There's a lot of times folks in those areas love to hunt too. So whether that's duck hunting or game hunting, right? There's different seasons, right? Boar and deer, and that, you know, meat is are animals that have lived in the wild. They have not been fed antibiotics. They are not, um, scared and hyped up on cortisol, ideally, right? Where that can be a really nice, clean addition to a diet if you can find a friend or neighbor who does hunt for food, and to kind of piggyback on that, right? That's another similar alternative to the cow share option, finding a farmer nearby. Rob, as we wrap up, because I know you have a patient here waiting for you, there's one stone we haven't unturned. Can you just speak briefly to something we hear a lot about, probiotics? What is a probiotic? Why would we need it? And for folks who don't have access to you specifically, where can folks get a good quality probiotic?
okay. So probiotics are just simply beneficial bacteria, right? So our gut, microbiome is made up of many different types of bacteria. And so oftentimes we can get an imbalance of the bacteria in the gut. It's just called intestinal dysbiosis, right? And then so we want to balance that out. So we add in the beneficial bacteria in the form of a probiotic. You can get probiotics that are both a prebiotic and a probiotic. Prebiotic is just simply the food for the probiotic, for the bacteria to eat. Like inulin is would be considered a prebiotic. So most of I wouldn't, as far as what's a good brand or something like that, I wouldn't get anything off of like a commercial shelf, like off your Walmart shelf or, local grocery store. But if you have a local health food store, they generally have pretty good, products and can kind of guide you. There's so many different types now because there's been so much research done on beneficial microbes for the gut. Like you can get probiotics that are specific for helping build the immune system. You can get probiotics that are specific for building, helping balance hormones. You can get different ones for skin conditions and mood and things like that. So there's so many. It just spans the gamut. But definitely, look at some of your, well, Ancient Nutrition is a decent brand. It's a commercial brand, right? They have pretty good products. Mary Ruth, is it Mary Ruth? I think is another brand that's pretty decent. I can't think of them off the top of my head right now because I don't. I mostly deal with ones that are only sold to health practitioners, so I can't really think of like over the counter ones right now. There are some good ones out there that people will bring in to me from time to time that look and test pretty well for them. I just can't think of them right now, but the main thing would be like I would get a little consultation around that, and like if best thing would be like to go either to a health practitioner and purchase it, or a health food store
Okay.
would be my recommendation.
Good stuff, honey. Thank
All
you.
right. Like I said, we
listen-
could go on and on, but
Oh, and we always say that. And so for folks who've listened and have questions, you can email us at Claudia. What's her email address?
From our perspective at protonmail.com.
Yes, you can also find Rob and I at robandkatietruax.com, Truax. Claudia is claudiaglassman.com and mightyoakparenting.com. And our podcast is everywhere, y'all. So share it with your family and friends. I know this is a lot of information. For some of you, it's going to feel like, oh, this is so elementary and rudimentary. I know so much more about this stuff. And for some of you, it's going to be like that mind blown emoji, like, holy cow, what was that? What are these people talking about? I don't even know where to start. I don't know what any of this means. So we're here to support you if you have questions. Claudia and I can try to take them. If not, we'll filter them to Dr. Rob and have him answer them for you.
Yeah. And I think Rob said this, but it is a process. Like even on our journey, like, I mean, we used to eat, you know what I mean? Like we were not always here either. It doesn't have to be, you start tomorrow and clean up everything and never eat junk food again.
right.
It's a process. And I think our bodies can be very forgiving when they are optimized most of the time, which is that 80-20 rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we can nurture it and keep it well balanced, it can handle some pesticides. It can handle detoxing a bit, right? So you don't have to go all crazy. And it is a process to get here. I think sometimes we talk about it like it's not that hard because we do it and we've been doing it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a point in time where it was a little harder. Took a little more effort. Yeah.
Yes.
So one thing, like
Mm-hmm.
pick, like Rob said, pick one thing, then pick two things, right? And just slowly make slow changes.
Absolutely. Slow and steady wins the race.
That's right. Thanks, Rob. Go work.
All right. Thanks,
Don't be
guys.
patient. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.